My name is Mia Whitmore. I'm 25. On paper, I'm just a small-town bookstore manager. Barely getting by. Driving a rusted 2009 Ford Focus. Living above my shop with squeaky floorboards and a chipped kettle. To most people, I'm invisible. To my family, I'm disappointing. Logan, the golden child. My younger brother is the dreamer. The tech genius. The supposed future of the family. My mother never hides her pride when talking about him. My father only calls me when they need something. But the truth they never saw coming is this. I inherited $49 million in silence, and I've been using it to take back everything they once denied me. It began on a gray November afternoon. The same day we buried my grandmother, Margaret Whitmore. The funeral was tasteful but cold. Like the way we all pretended to mourn. My relatives didn't cry, they calculated. I watched them argue in low voices over who would get her antique set. Who would take the diamond necklace she wore every Thanksgiving? And who would claim the old wooden house in Vermont? No one asked how I felt. No one even looked my way. I slipped out during the reception, climbed into my car, and finally opened the cream-colored envelope she left for me. My name written on the front in her familiar shaky cursive. Inside was a letter. And behind it, power. Don't let them see you have anything. Mia. It read. People's true nature only shows when they think you've got nothing left to lose. There were no I love yous. No final farewell. Just a life lesson. Cold. Clear. Brutal. And a thick packet from a Boston law firm I'd never heard of. The last will and testament of Margaret A. Whitmore. It named only me as the sole heir to everything she had built: 12 properties across 3 states, controlling shares in 3 investment companies, and a private trust fund that had grown from a modest sum into a diversified investment portfolio worth nearly $50 million. Not my mother, Karen. Not my tech visionary brother, Logan. Not even my stepfather, Rick. Just me. Mia. The one they barely invited to family holidays. The one who paid her way through college while Logan blew through venture capital on startups that never made it past a prototype. It didn't feel real. I remember staring at the dashboard for over an hour. The letter trembling in my hands. Rereading every word. I thought maybe there was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was deliberate. Grandma never wasted a move. She saw something in me that no one else did. And more importantly, she saw through everyone else. She saw their greed, their entitlement, their addiction to image and validation. She warned me not to tell them. And I didn't. That very night. While my mother whispered to relatives about how Grandma Margaret left us nothing but some dusty books and broke people's ideals, I smiled quietly and nodded. Because the dusty books now owned half a block in downtown Boston. From that day, I began living 2 lives. By day, I still worked at Maple Pages, the independent bookstore I'd worked at since college. I still made my own coffee. Still climbed the rickety stairs to the tiny apartment above. Customers thought I was sweet. Humble. A bit too quiet. My landlord thought I was struggling to make rent. Even my best friend, Lucy. I believed I was barely getting by. And I let them. I let them all believe I was just the same quiet bookstore girl I'd always been. But at night, when the world went silent, I logged into my encrypted financial dashboards. I reviewed reports from Carter Holdings. I approved investments through Margaret Legacy Trust. I quietly acquired real estate, leveraged assets, and expanded my influence. I didn't do it to show off, I did it to prepare. because I knew the day would come when I'd need to reveal it all. I just had to wait. Meanwhile, my family spiraled, though they were too proud to admit it. My mother constantly complained about the rising cost of living. Gas prices. Electricity bills. She'd call and say things like, "Logan needs a new laptop. Do you have any savings?" "Sweetheart." Just a little. I'd smile into the phone and reply, "Not yet, Mom." Still trying to make it through the month. Logan kept pitching new ideas: a wellness app for dogs, a startup that matched freelancers with AI-generated clients. None of them worked. He burned through over $300. Zero of my mom's savings, and still. She called him a visionary. She told the neighbors he was the next Elon Musk. Me, I was the shadow in the background. The disappointment who never had ambition. It's a strange feeling. Being simultaneously invisible and in control. I remember sitting at Logan's startup launch party, his third launch, while my mother handed out drinks and introduced him to investors. She pulled me aside, scanned my outfit, and whispered, "You should at least try a little makeup. Mia. Even Zirina dresses better. And she's just a secretary." I laughed silently. That morning, I had signed off on the acquisition of a commercial building in Chicago's financial district. I didn't need to look like a CEO. I was one. But the truth, it still stung. No matter how much money I managed. No matter how many deals I closed in Margaret's name. It hurt every time my family looked through me. Every dinner where Logan's failures were spun into potential. Every time my parents asked for help without realizing I was the one who already owned the bank they were borrowing from. Every time I watched my mother pretend to be generous while quietly judging my existence. They believed I was weak. And I let them. Because that's what my grandmother taught me: let them underestimate you. Let them show who they really are. Then choose your moment. That moment arrived the night I found out they had refinanced the Newton house again. My mother sold her old engagement ring. My father quietly liquidated his company shares. Logan. He was busy posting Instagram stories from a rented Porsche, still claiming his startup was about to explode. But I knew the truth. Because I held the mortgage. Through one of my shell companies, Willow Fund LLC. I had acquired the house debt weeks earlier. My lawyer sent me a report with the latest missed payments. Another warning letter was scheduled to go out the next day. And then, late that evening, my mother came to see me. She was dressed impeccably. As always, heels, a pearl necklace, designer coat. But there was something off. Her hands trembled. Her smile faltered. She held an envelope close to her chest like it might vanish. "Mia," she said softly, "I need your help. The house is about to be repossessed. I can't tell Logan. It would destroy him. Please. Just this once." I took the envelope. Inside was the foreclosure notice I had personally signed off on 3 days ago. I looked up at her. And for a moment, something twisted in my chest. Not pity. Not love. Just a deep, aching awareness of how far we had fallen from what we once pretended to be. She had raised me with cold hands and colder expectations. And now, she was asking the girl she once called a waste of tuition for salvation. I said nothing. Just nodded. Told her I'd see what I could do. She left with hope in her eyes. She had no idea that the person holding the knife was the same daughter she'd spent a lifetime cutting down. And she had no idea what was coming next. That night, after my mother left, I sat in my upstairs office, nothing more than a converted storage room above the bookstore. my fingers trembling over the laptop trackpad. The foreclosure notice she'd given me still sat on my desk. Ironically signed by a subsidiary of Hawthorne Holdings, another name for the empire I now controlled. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, like prophecy. Don't let them see you have anything, Mia. And for 3 years, he hadn't. But silence is not the absence of power. Sometimes it's the most strategic position of all. I opened my encrypted dashboard. Every asset, every loan, every mortgage connected to the Hayes family was now under my authority. I knew every line of credit they had touched, every payment they had missed. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger implies you want something back. I didn't. I just wanted them to see. See who I had become when they weren't watching. See what happens when the forgotten daughter stops waiting for love and starts taking control. But I wasn't ready to strike yet. Because this wasn't going to be some impulsive outburst. No. This was going to be a precise unraveling. Like pulling a thread from a beautifully tailored suit until the whole thing collapses. And no one remembers how it ever held together. And I had all the threads. Step 1 was exposure slow. Painful. Undeniable. That weekend, I approved a quiet audit of Hayes Enterprises, my father's once respected real estate firm. Not through legal channels, but through an internal review by Trident Financial, one of my holding company's subsidiaries. The results were grim. Outdated insurance, leaky liquidity, hidden personal loans disguised as business expenses. A house of cards built on pride and pretense. I didn't send a notice. I didn't call. I waited. Because soon, they'd come knocking again, and this time, I wouldn't be the shadow in the corner. I would be the storm overhead. Meanwhile, Logan launched his latest vision. This time, it was a pet nutrition AI platform, an app where cats could select food based on smell simulations. He held a press party in a downtown co-working space he didn't own, wearing a borrowed blazer and flashing a Rolex gifted by my mother funded. Of course. By refinancing the family home. I showed up late, in a plain navy sweater and flats, holding a takeout coffee and pretending I was just swinging by. Logan smirked when he saw me. Mia. Still smellin' like old books, he said. Loud enough for the interns to laugh. I smiled back. Still better than smelling like desperation. He didn't get it. Of course he didn't. He thought the Porsche he drove, which was leased under a shell company I had quietly acquired last month, was his. He thought the PR company hyping his pitch was unpaid. He thought his latest round of seed funding was still pending. It had been rejected 2 weeks ago. By Larchmont Ventures, which I also owned. Through another name. Naturally. Every time he reached out for support, for financing, for help, he found me. But he never saw me. That was the plan. The second step was pressure. When you tighten the air around someone, they show their real nature. And sure enough, the cracks began to form. My mother stopped going to the country club. My father started taking calls outside, pacing like a man with something to hide. The family dinners became fewer, shorter, quieter. My name still didn't come up unless they needed something. But the tone was changing. There was desperation beneath the condescension now. Then, one night, my mother called, whispering like a teenager breaking curfew. Mia, do you have a few thousand? The water heater broke. And, no. Mom, I said gently. I just paid rent. Silence on the line. Then a heavy sigh. Logan's working on something big. Once he gets funding. Of course. I replied. He always is. But this time, I added something else. By the way, Mom, if the heater's broken, maybe it's time to downsize. Her voice sharpened. Excuse me. Nothing. I said. Just a thought. I hung up and forwarded the foreclosure confirmation to my attorney. The countdown had begun. The next week, my father called not to ask, but to demand. Your mother tells me you refused to help. I stayed silent. You work in a bookstore. Mia. What are you holding on to money for pride? I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Instead, I asked. What about Logan? Logan's trying. He has a vision. You don't understand how hard it is for young men to get ahead these days. Young men. Not children. Not people. Men. Because in his world, my gender was still a disqualification. If you won't help, he said after a pause, then you're no longer my daughter. I ended the call with a calm goodbye. Dad. No shaking hands. No tears. Just a quiet, decisive, full stop. Step 3 was the reveal. But not yet. Not fully. First, they needed to fall. Not crash but crumble. Bit by bit. Under the weight of their own illusions. And that meant giving them just enough rope to keep believing they were in control. I delayed the final foreclosure by 10 days. Just long enough for my mother to make a dozen phone calls. Ask around. Even try to pawn an old necklace that turned out to be fake. Logan, oblivious as ever, posted a story about his pre-meeting nerves for a funding pitch that had already been blacklisted by every firm I controlled. I let them fumble. I let them beg. And then, just as the clock hit 0, I filed the notice. But not in secret. This time, I made sure the hearing was public. Because sometimes, the only way to make people see is to put them on a stage they can't walk off from. And what better stage than a courtroom? The morning of the hearing, Boston felt unusually still. Like the entire city was holding its breath. I arrived at the Suffolk County Courthouse early, parking my sleek black Mercedes 2 blocks away to avoid attention. My trench coat was perfectly pressed, hair tied back in a soft bun, makeup understated but precise. Everything about me said calm, control, clarity. And yet, under the surface, my pulse drummed with a quiet electricity, not fear. Not anticipation, just the sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Courtroom 6B was already half full when I stepped inside. Local press lined the benches in the back. Hayes Enterprises, despite its decline, still had name recognition. My parents had made sure of that. A family-run real estate empire. Now, at the center of a multi-million-dollar collapse, was bound to draw eyes. No one looked twice at me. No cameras followed. To them, I was a legal assistant. A bystander. Invisible. Just like I'd been my whole life. At 8:41 a.m. Exactly. My family entered. Logan led. As always. Walking fast. Pretending to be important. My father followed. Jaw clenched. The kind of tension that only financial ruin could bring. My mother trailed behind. Her usual elegance dimmed. The pearl necklace replaced with a modest chain. Her eyes scanning the room in confusion. They were looking for someone. A savior. Perhaps. Or someone to blame. They had no idea they were looking at both. Judge Wanda Ellison entered. A woman known for her merciless efficiency. She glanced briefly at the docket. Civil bankruptcy hearing. File 4928. Defendant the Hayes family. Primary creditor. Please confirm presence. I stood. The room didn't go silent, it shattered. Logan turned first. His sunglasses slipping down his nose. My mother's jaw dropped, her lips quivered. My father blinked like someone seeing a ghost. I gave a single nod. Calm. Deliberate. Mia Whitmore. Legal representative of Whitmore Holdings. Primary creditor for all outstanding debts listed under Hayes family assets. The murmurs spread like ripples in a pond. I could feel the tension snap. And still, I didn't look away. Judge Ellison raised an eyebrow. Her voice neutral. You may proceed. Miss Whitmore. I opened my briefcase and handed the prepared documents to the clerk. Your Honor. Over the past 3 years, the defendants have taken out multiple high-interest loans, refinanced their home 3 times, and accumulated over $12.7 million in overlapping debts. Whitmore Holdings has acquired 100% of those debts through structured financial channels. We are here to present a restructuring proposal. Not to liquidate yet. I turned to my family, now frozen in disbelief. Logan was the first to find his voice. Mia. What the hell is this? You work at a bookstore. No. I said gently. I own the bookstore. And 15 commercial properties. And 6 financial firms. And every loan you've taken out since 2021. My mother's eyes filled with tears. You lied to us. No. I said. Voice steady. I let you lie to yourselves. Judge Ellison cleared her throat. Miss Whitmore. The court is listening. What are your conditions? I slid a second folder forward. 3 non-negotiable terms. My fingers tapped the table. Once. Condition 1. Logan Hayes is to be removed from all family accounts. No credit lines. No funding. No new startups. He is to obtain full-time employment immediately. I've arranged a position, sales associate. Pet King. Roxbury. $15 per hour. Entry level. No exemptions. Logan bolted upright. You've lost your damn mind. I'm not stocking dog food like some loser. You already are one. I replied. Calm as ice. This job is a step up. Judge Ellison struck her gavel. Order. Continue. Condition 2, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes are to enter a 12-month financial rehabilitation program. Weekly reports. Budget capped at 2. Wu Bai. No discretionary spending without approval. My father's face turned red. You're humiliating us. No. I corrected. You did that yourselves. Final condition. I said slowly. The Newton property, the mansion, is to be sold within 45 days. Proceeds go toward debt settlement. A smaller, manageable residence has already been purchased in Worcester. 3 bedrooms. Backyard. Enough for what you need. Not what you want. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scribbling of a journalist in the back row. No one moved. No one breathed. This wasn't a proposal. It was an execution, precise. Clean. Inevitable. Judge Ellison reviewed the papers. This is, frankly, the most structured and generous offer I've seen. Counsel for the defendants. The family's lawyer whispered frantically to my father. After a tense moment, he nodded. We accept. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood, gathered my papers, and said, "Then we're done here." But we weren't. Not even close. Outside, the wind blew hard. My mother followed me down the steps. No longer angry, just broken. Why? Mia, why are you doing this to us? I turned. Met her eyes. Because it's the only way you'll see me. Not as weak. Not as the spare child. As the woman who saved your life while you were too busy mocking hers. She didn't answer. She couldn't. 3 days later, Logan's Porsche was gone. Repossessed. A 2015 Corolla arrived at the Worcester address, my gift. Basic. Reliable. Humble. Like me. Once. That night, Logan messaged me. "You've ruined my life." I didn't reply. Because the truth is, I didn't ruin anything. I simply revealed what was always broken. The Worcester house stood quiet that first morning. Like it was still adjusting to its new occupants. No marble columns. No imported rugs. No. Staff gliding from room to room like ghosts maintaining an illusion. Just 3 bedrooms. A modest kitchen. And a backyard with a plum tree I'd specifically requested. Not for aesthetics, but because Grandma once told me that plum trees bloom strongest in bitter soil. My parents moved in with no ceremony. There was no press. No neighbors peeking from manicured hedges. Just exhaustion. I didn't visit. I wanted to. But this part they had to do alone. The first week, I received updates from the financial oversight program I'd enrolled them in. Nothing formal, just behavioral notes. Clients appear disoriented. Resistant to budget plans. Another frequent emotional outbursts. Difficulty adjusting to status change. It felt surreal. The same woman who once sneered at budget supermarkets now clipped coupons. The man who mocked me for working during college now had to account for every dollar spent on groceries. Logan lasted 2 shifts at Pet King. On the 3rd day, he called in sick. By the 5th, he texted me. "This is beneath me. I'm quitting." I didn't answer. 2 weeks later, a new report came in. He'd gone back. Quiet. Distant. But present. For the first time in years. He was doing something resembling work. Meanwhile, I kept my distance. But I watched everything. Reports came weekly. My private attorney sent transcripts of every financial workshop they attended. At first, their answers were curt. Dismissive. But by the 3rd session, my mother had started taking notes. My father had begun tracking expenses in a small, battered notebook. 3 months passed. Slowly. Imperceptibly. The fog began to lift. One afternoon, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Short and surprisingly neat. "I cleaned the entire attic today. Found your 3rd grade painting. Still has glitter. I put it in a frame. Thought maybe it deserved a real place now. Mom." I didn't cry, but I stared at the paper for a long time, wondering if this was the beginning of something real, or just a fleeting attempt to feel less broken. Around the same time, Logan emailed me. No demands. No excuses. Just a sentence. How did you learn all this? About finance? About control? About people. I started typing. Deleted it. Then typed again. Pain. And books. I didn't elaborate. He didn't reply. But 2 days later, the HR manager at Pet King noted Logan had volunteered to assist in inventory, unpaid. Outside work hours. My parents never tried to call. Maybe pride. Maybe shame. Or maybe they finally understood that words weren't currency anymore. Only actions. Then, in early spring, I went to see them. I didn't announce it. I drove myself. Parked 5 houses down. The street was lined with modest homes, each one breathing a kind of quiet resilience. The Worcester house looked lived in. Not polished. Not grand. But real. My father was outside, wiping down the front windows with an old towel. His back hunched not from age, but from weight finally acknowledged. My mother was tending to the backyard. No pearls. No cashmere. Just a worn hoodie and rubber gloves. She was pulling weeds. Slowly. Carefully. I didn't walk up. I watched from across the street, letting the image sink in. There was no conversation. No confrontation. Just the soft hum of reality. That night, back in my apartment, I wrote in my digital journal, sometimes, collapse is a form of rebirth. Not everyone rises, but some finally learn how to stand. The following week, something unexpected happened. A small envelope arrived at Maple Pages, addressed in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a check not to me, but to the bookstore. Wu Bai. And a note. For the community reading shelf. I think Grandma would have liked that. I stared at it. Frozen. This wasn't payment. It wasn't guilt money. It was contribution. Kayet. Sincere. For the first time, she wasn't trying to buy dignity. She was trying to earn it. I walked into the back of the store and quietly pinned the check behind the counter. I wouldn't cash it. Not yet. But I'd keep it there, as a reminder that even people made of marble can soften when forced to sit still with their own silence. The days grew longer. Logan continued at Pet King. And word had it he'd even helped design a new adoption outreach board. No startups. No AI babble. Just posters for rescue cats and flyers with hand-drawn paw prints. In the spring board meeting of Whitmore Holdings, I declined a proposal to liquidate a real estate block near Worcester. Let it sit. I told the board. Let it grow at its own pace. No one argued. They never did anymore. That same week, I got a call from the local community center. Miss Whitmore, your mother asked if she could volunteer at the literacy program. Help adults who never learned to read. She said. She has time now. I didn't know how to respond. I simply said, yes. Let her. Later that night, I stood in my office, looking out over the Boston skyline. The city glittered as always, unmoved. Indifferent. But inside me, something had shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But peace. I opened the small wooden box I'd kept hidden in a locked drawer. Inside was a photograph of me and Grandma Margaret, taken in front of the bookstore when I was 13. She had her hand on my shoulder, a slight smirk on her lips, as if she knew I'd be the one to finish what she started. I whispered to the photo. You were right. They only saw the bookshelf, not the spine that held it upright. And for the first time since she passed, I didn't feel like I was living a double life anymore. Spring came early that year. Boston was still cold, but the air had lost its bite. There were flower buds on Commonwealth Avenue, and the city felt less like a battlefield and more like a chapter turning itself. One evening, I returned to Maple Pages not as a visitor, not as an investor, but as myself. The girl who once stacked Murakami novels and brewed burnt coffee was still in there somewhere, buried under mergers and asset portfolios. I walked into the back corner of the store, to the free, if you need it more than I do, shelf. A woman stood there with a child, maybe 7 years old, holding a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. The mother hesitated, eyes darting to the free sign. Uncertain. I nodded softly from across the room. She mouthed, "Thank you," without a sound. I smiled, then turned back toward the office, where a photo of Grandma Margaret now sat in a simple black frame above the desk. That night, I wrote my final line in the digital journal I'd kept since her funeral. Power doesn't make you free, but letting go of needing it, that does. Weeks passed. One Tuesday morning, I received a hand-delivered letter. Cream-colored envelope. No return address. I knew that handwriting. Mia. It began. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know we're trying. Your father even started growing tomatoes. Says the soil in Worcester is better than Newton. Logan and I are learning. We've enrolled in a family therapy group. Sometimes I cry during the sessions. Not out of guilt, but grief. Grief for all the years I spent clinging to a version of success that didn't include you. I used to think dignity was something you wore pearls, handbags, private clubs. Now I think maybe it's something you plant, one seed at a time. I hope we're not too late. Karen. I sat for a long time with that letter. Reread it twice. It didn't undo anything. But maybe it wasn't meant to. Maybe some apologies weren't roads back, just mile markers in the right direction. Later that week, Logan showed up at the bookstore unannounced. He wore no sunglasses, no designer jacket, just a gray hoodie and jeans that actually fit. He looked thinner, but grounded. He didn't ask for money. He didn't complain about work. Instead, he held out a small, clumsily wrapped package. I made this, he said, almost embarrassed. It's a prototype for an educational app. Teaches budgeting and credit literacy for teens. Real-world stuff. I partnered with a nonprofit. No investors. No pitch decks. I took the package. Inside was a simple tablet interface. Bare bones, but clean. Thoughtful. Why tell me, I asked. Quietly. Because this time, I want to build something that doesn't need to be sold. Just used. I nodded. That's a start. And it was. A very slow, very fragile start. A month later, I stood in front of a packed hall at Harvard Business School. The topic was Inherited Power and Quiet Influence Building Empires in Silence. The audience expected numbers, charts, acquisition models. Instead, I began like this. My name is Mia Whitmore. I was once called useless, forgettable, and naive by my own family. I never argued back. I built a portfolio instead. Laughter. Nervous. Surprised. But they listened. I inherited $36 million. But I kept working at a bookstore to see who would still respect me when I looked like I had nothing. Spoiler, not many did. But that was the lesson. People don't reveal who they are when they're grateful. They show it when they think you owe them. I shared everything. The silent years. The masks. The temptation to crush them. And the decision not to. Revenge, I said, is easy when you have leverage. But choosing to give people a second chance, that's the hardest kind of power. Because it demands something far more rare than strategy restraint. When I stepped off the stage, a young woman approached. Barely 20. Tears in her eyes. My mom always tells me I'll never be enough unless I become a lawyer like she wanted. She whispered. Sometimes I feel invisible. Like even if I win, it's not going to matter. I took her hand. You're not invisible. You're just unrecognized. That's temporary. Your worth isn't negotiable. Even when your own blood can't see it. A week later, I finally visited the Worcester house. No appointment. No warning. My mother opened the door. Her hair was streaked with silver now. She didn't wear makeup. But her eyes were clear. Oh, she said softly. You came. I nodded. Just to see the plum tree. In the backyard. It was blooming. She followed me out. We stood there in silence, watching petals drift. I wasn't a good mother, she said suddenly. No. I agreed. But you were the mother I needed to become who I am. She turned to me. Startled. Pain teaches, I said. And you gave me a full scholarship in that subject. We both laughed. Not cruelly. Just truthfully. My father waved from the kitchen. Logan stepped out holding a watering can. Looking sheepish. I didn't move toward them. Just stood beside the tree. I'm not here to fix anything, I told her. I'm here to witness that maybe, just maybe, something new can grow from the wreckage. She didn't cry. She just nodded. Before I left, I handed her a small envelope. Inside, a pre-approved grant from Whitmore Holdings for her literacy project. Anonymous. No signatures. No conditions. Just in case, I said. At the door, she asked, Do you hate us? I turned slowly. I did. But hate is a chain. And I cut mine the day you stopped pretending. She whispered, Thank you. I didn't answer. I just walked away. Back in Boston, I went to the rooftop of my building that night. The city was glowing. People still rushed. Still judged. Still missed the quiet ones. I sipped mint tea and looked up at the stars. Grandma once said, They'll call you plain until you shine so brightly they need sunglasses just to look your way. I think she'd be proud. And if someone, somewhere, is quietly surviving what I survived, being overlooked, used, belittled, I hope they hear this. Don't rush to scream your worth. Let silence do the loudest speaking. Let your growth be your answer. Your peace. Your victory. Let them think you have nothing. Until one day, they realize you are everything. And by then, you'll be too free to care. Story 2. I'm Emily, 52 years old, and the mother of one son, Jason. The night of his wedding was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of pride and love. Instead, it became a painful revelation. I was seated in the very back row, hidden behind the florist's assistant and the bride's distant relatives. Meanwhile, his stepfather stood front and center, delivering a glowing toast. signing the marriage certificate, and basking in all the applause. No one mentioned me, not in the speeches, not in the quiet moments between. I smiled, clapped, took pictures like I was supposed to. But inside, a cold emptiness was spreading. Jason's wedding wasn't just an event, it was a mirror that showed me exactly where I stood in his life. I wasn't the father who mattered anymore. I was the invisible source of money. That smug comment from his stepfather, "Thanks for covering everything, old man," was the final cut. It wasn't meant as a compliment. It was a dismissal. Later that night, sitting alone at my desk with a glass of wine, I made the call to the bank. I froze every single payment related to the wedding, the venue, the catering, the photographer, the travel reimbursements. All paused. It was my quiet way of saying I'm done being invisible. I'm done being taken for granted. The silence that followed was heavy. Years of quietly paying bills, handling logistics, never asking for thanks, all disregarded. The vendors started calling, confused and worried, asking why payments hadn't gone through. I told them to speak with Jason. Then the messages came from the bride's family. The stepfather, passive-aggressive pleas, blaming me for ruining everything. I didn't respond. I let the silence speak louder than words. Jason sent me one message, cautiously asking if there was a problem. I stayed silent. I wasn't interested in explaining the wound that night's seating arrangement had carved into me. The truth was clear: I had been replaced, and my role had been reduced to funding. The fallout was swift. Vendors demanded payment. Hotels scrambled to save reservations. And the band walked out. The perfect wedding they had dreamed of collapsed. And I watched from the sidelines, calm and detached. This wasn't revenge, it was clarity. Days later, Jason showed up at my door. No anger, no apology, just exhaustion and reality crashing down on him. He talked about bills piling up, the stepfather backing out of promises, vendors threatening legal action. He admitted he hadn't known how much I had done behind the scenes. For once, he didn't ask me to fix it. He just sat and faced the consequences. That conversation wasn't about the wedding, it was about rebuilding a relationship shattered by years of neglect and silence. I told him I was open to talking, but only on new terms built on respect, honesty, and responsibility. The old roles were gone. In the days that followed, I handed over all vendor correspondence to Jason and refused to manage the mess I had been excluded from. I invested in myself for the first time in years: a small trip, home improvements, quiet dinners alone. The label of funding father was gone. I was reclaiming my identity. The family fractured further. But in that fracture, I found freedom. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen not for what I gave, but for who I was. This story isn't just about money or weddings. It's about boundaries, respect, and self-worth. It's about finding your voice when you've been silenced. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, remember, reclaiming your power isn't betrayal. It's survival. As I closed that chapter, I realized something profound. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to stop giving when you're used to carrying everything. But letting go is how you learn to live again. And Jason, he's learning to stand on his own. Finally seeing the man who stood behind the scenes all along. The father who loved silently. And at last, asked to be seen. The days following the wedding were a blur of silence and absence. The vendor's frustration echoed through emails and phone calls. But none reached me directly anymore. Jason was left to handle the fallout. And for the first time, I watched from a distance without stepping in. It wasn't pride or stubbornness, it was exhaustion. A slow-burning realization that years of carrying others had left me empty and unseen. Jason's absence during those critical days was telling. No frantic calls or desperate messages to me. No questions about what went wrong. Just an unspoken hope that someone else would fix the chaos. That someone had been me for too long. Now, he was forced to face the mess alone. And though I knew it pained him, I remained resolute. This was his reckoning. And it was overdue. I spent my mornings walking the neighborhood, reclaiming my space from the constant demands and expectations that had once defined my existence. I revisited old hobbies I had abandoned: painting, reading novels I'd bought but never touched. Nights were quiet. Sometimes too quiet. But in that stillness, I found a rare peace. Yet the weight of betrayal pressed on me. I replayed that wedding night. The sting of invisibility, sinking deeper each time. How could the son I raised, the boy I sacrificed for, overlook me so completely? I wasn't just a wallet or an afterthought, I was his mother. Someone who had quietly kept the family afloat. Then, one afternoon, Jason called. His voice was low, hesitant, as if measuring each word. He apologized not just for the wedding, but for the years he hadn't noticed me, for taking my sacrifices for granted. The admission was a crack in the cold wall he'd built between us. And for a moment, hope flickered. We talked about more than the wedding. He shared his fears, his insecurities about stepping into adulthood without the safety net I had provided. I confessed my own disappointments, the loneliness that came from being invisible in my own family. It was raw and uncomfortable, but necessary. Slowly, we began to rebuild. Jason started taking responsibility for the debts left unpaid, communicating with vendors, trying to repair relationships strained by neglect. I supported him, but this time on my terms. I was no longer the silent benefactor, but a partner who demanded respect and honesty. The stepfather remained a shadow in the background, resentful, dismissive, unwilling to acknowledge the truth. His toast, once filled with hollow praise, now felt like a cruel joke. But I no longer cared about his approval. My fight was with the family dynamic that allowed him to replace me so easily. Friends and neighbors noticed the change in me. I was no longer the woman who silently absorbed every slight or demand. I spoke up, set boundaries, and refused to be taken for granted. Some relationships strained under the pressure, but the ones that mattered deepened with newfound honesty. The house that once felt like a prison became a sanctuary. I renovated my space, filling it with light and color, symbols of a life reclaimed. I took weekend trips alone, something unimaginable before, savoring moments of solitude and self-discovery. Yet, beneath the calm, a quiet storm brewed: the knowledge that the family I had built was fractured, perhaps beyond repair. The sacrifices I made were invisible no more. But the cost was isolation. Was it worth it? The answer came in the form of peace, the kind that comes not from others' recognition but from honoring your own worth. One evening, I received a message from Jason. Can we talk? No expectations. No past baggage. Just us. He hesitated, then replied, I'm here. It was a fragile truce. A new beginning. This story isn't just about a wedding or money. It's about finding your voice amid silence, reclaiming respect in a world that tries to erase you, It's about the quiet courage it takes to say, enough. And as the sun set on that chapter, I realized sometimes the most powerful act of love is choosing yourself. The days that followed the fragile conversation with Jason marked a slow but profound shift in my life and in our fractured relationship. I no longer bore the invisible weight of endless financial support. Nor did I remain the silent shadow behind his milestones. That role had ended, whether he was ready to accept it or not. But healing was not linear, and the road ahead was tangled with doubts, resentments, and moments of unexpected clarity. I began reclaiming my identity beyond the labels of provider and background parent. The home, once cluttered with reminders of obligations, slowly transformed into a sanctuary. Paintbrushes replaced unopened bills. Plants flourished on windowsills where old grievances had taken root. And the sound of my own laughter echoed more often than silence. For the first time in years, I was nurturing myself. Yet, the echoes of the past lingered. I still grappled with the sharp sting of invisibility at the wedding, the feeling that my sacrifices were reduced to mere transactions, that my presence was an afterthought. I caught myself replaying the moment the stepfather patted my shoulder with that cruel smile, as if I were nothing more than a bank account. That memory, bitter and vivid, fueled a quiet fire within me. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect. About reclaiming dignity stolen by years of neglect. At the same time, I noticed Jason wrestling with his own awakening. He called more often. Not just to check in, but to seek advice. To share his fears about stepping into adulthood without the safety net I once provided. The realization dawned on him that the wedding's fallout wasn't merely logistical chaos, but a symptom of deeper neglect. Watching him face consequences I had shielded him from was painful but necessary. It was a hard lesson in responsibility and appreciation. Our conversations deepened. We spoke not only about bills and vendors, but about emotions long buried: resentment, guilt, love, and hope. I shared how being sidelined had hollowed me out, how I had longed for recognition beyond the checkbook. He listened. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes with the awkwardness of a son discovering his mother anew. Those talks became the foundation of a fragile but genuine reconciliation. The stepfather, predictably, remained aloof and dismissive. His toast at the wedding now felt like an empty mockery of the truth. He never reached out, never apologized, and seemed intent on maintaining his facade of control. But his power to hurt diminished as I stepped out of the shadows. I refused to compete for validation with someone who saw family as a status symbol rather than a bond. As I set boundaries, some family relationships strained and frayed. My sister, always on the periphery, distanced herself further, uncomfortable with my newfound assertiveness. My mother, proud and silent, never acknowledged the rift openly. But the tension was palpable in her rare visits and curt phone calls. Even so, these fissures felt like necessary costs of survival. I was shedding the roles that had confined me. Amid this upheaval, unexpected alliances emerged. Friends who had witnessed my quiet endurance stepped forward, offering support that was genuine and unconditional. Neighbors invited me into their lives, sharing meals and stories that reminded me of the world beyond my family's turmoil. These connections stitched new threads of belonging and strength. The house that had once felt like a prison now brimmed with light and possibility. I planned small trips, moments of solitude to rediscover what I wanted from life. I reconnected with passions shelved for too long: gardening, writing, even a tentative return to painting. Each day was a step toward reclaiming not just my home, But my soul, still, the shadow of loss lingered. The family I had dedicated my life to was fractured, and the sacrifices I made were now clear and unreciprocated. Yet, I found solace in the hard truth. I no longer needed their validation to affirm my worth. The peace I sought was not in their acknowledgement but in my own acceptance. One evening, Jason sent a message. "Can we talk? No expectations. Just us." My heart hesitated. This was an opening. A chance to rewrite a story marred by silence and neglect. I replied simply, "I'm here." It was a fragile truce, but a beginning nonetheless. This chapter wasn't about a wedding or money, it was about voice, respect, and the courage to claim both. It was about learning to say, "I deserve to be seen," even when those closest refused to look. As the sun set on that evening, I realized the most powerful act of love was choosing myself, and that, above all, was my true victory. After that evening's quiet resolve, the ripples of change began to spread. It wasn't a dramatic upheaval, but a slow unraveling of old patterns and the building of new boundaries. I was no longer just a silent supporter behind the scenes, I had become a force quietly reshaping the family's fragile dynamics. This shift unsettled many, but I welcomed it as the price of reclaiming my dignity. Jason's calls became more frequent, sometimes hesitant, sometimes direct. We started unpacking years of unspoken grievances, how his stepfather's overshadowing toast wasn't just a moment of humiliation but a symbol of how my role had been diminished. I shared my feelings of invisibility, not as blame, but as truth that needed to be recognized. His silence spoke volumes, an acknowledgement of his own awakening to what he had overlooked. This dialogue was messy and slow but necessary. Meanwhile, the stepfather's cold distance hardened. He seemed determined to keep his grip on the family's narrative, presenting himself as the pillar of strength while erasing the very contributions that made that possible. I watched from the sidelines as he maintained appearances, aware that his power was slipping with every boundary I set. His refusal to engage only highlighted the emptiness beneath his facade. My mother's reaction was quieter but no less painful. She never voiced regret or apology, instead retreating into a wary silence, perhaps out of pride or confusion. Her visits became sparse and her tone clipped. The warmth that once filled the room cooled, leaving an uneasy tension hanging in the air. But I didn't chase her approval anymore. I was learning to stand firm in my own truth. In contrast, unexpected support came from places I hadn't anticipated. Close friends noticed my change, reaching out with kindness and understanding. Neighbors invited me to join in their lives, offering connection free from obligation or judgment. These relationships, built on mutual respect, became my new anchor. Slowly, my world expanded beyond the confines of family expectations. The house itself began to reflect this transformation. Spaces once filled with reminders of duty and sacrifice turned into havens of peace and creativity. I painted the walls in colors I loved, planted a small garden that flourished under my care, and found solace in simple routines that nourished my soul. Each act was a reclaiming of space, both physical and emotional. Yet, even in this growth, the ache of loss lingered. The family I had devoted myself to remained fractured, the wounds of neglect raw beneath the surface. But I was no longer defined by their recognition or lack thereof. I had found a quiet power in self-acceptance and the freedom to live authentically. One night, a message from Jason flickered on my phone. "I'd like to try again, not just as father and son, but as people, when you're ready." The words were tentative, heavy with the weight of the past and the hope for a new beginning. I stared at the screen, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and longing. After a long pause, I typed back, "I'm here." This was more than reconciliation. It was the start of a new chapter. One where boundaries were respected. And love was no longer measured by money or obligation, but by presence and honesty. As I set my phone down, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with moments of doubt and healing. But for the first time, it felt like my story was truly my own. The days following Jason's message were marked by a careful rebuilding. Tentative and fragile. Our conversations were measured, weaving through memories and missed opportunities, but also hopes and plans for what might be. I was cautious, aware that rebuilding trust wasn't about erasing the past but acknowledging it honestly. The wounds ran deep, and healing would take time. This I knew. Meanwhile, the household was quiet, but beneath that silence, change was stirring. The stepfather, stripped of financial control, shifted his focus to maintaining appearances and influence through social circles and family gossip. His cold smile masked a growing frustration. His power, once assumed, was now slipping through his fingers. The once invisible battle for respect and recognition was now out in the open. Subtle, yet fierce. My mother remained silent, a ghost in her own home, watching the changes with a mix of regret and defiance. Her silence spoke of pride and pain, the complex layers of family loyalty tangled with disappointment. Yet, even without her words, I felt her struggle to come to terms with the new reality of family no longer bound by old roles and unspoken rules. In contrast, new relationships blossomed, unexpected and genuine. Friends who had quietly observed my struggles stepped forward, offering support not born of obligation but of empathy. These connections became a lifeline, reminding me that family isn't only defined by blood, but by who truly sees and values us. I found solace in reclaiming my space, both literally and figuratively. The house, once a symbol of duty and burden, transformed into a sanctuary. I filled it with colors and scents that soothed my spirit, and cultivated a garden that flourished with my care, each bloom a testament to growth after hardship. These small acts of creation became powerful affirmations of self-worth and autonomy. Yet, the path was not without its shadows. Moments of loneliness and doubt crept in, haunting reminders of what had been lost. But with each challenge, my resolve deepened. I was no longer the silent financier, the invisible father. I was a woman reclaiming her narrative, choosing peace over pain. Jason and I continued to navigate this new dynamic cautiously. His willingness to face our fractured past, to step into his own responsibility, was a glimmer of hope. Our conversations grew more open. Laughter slowly returned, and with it, a fragile but real connection. This was not a fairy tale reconciliation, but a realignment grounded in honesty and respect. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting warm hues through the living room window, Jason looked at me and said, "Thank you for standing your ground, for showing me what family really means." His words carried the weight of years of misunderstanding and the promise of something better. I smiled, feeling a quiet strength within me, knowing this was just the beginning of a different kind of journey. As I closed the door behind him that night, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The silence that had once been heavy with absence was now filled with possibility. I had shed the weight of unreciprocated sacrifice and embraced a future where my worth was not tied to what I gave, but to who I was. The story doesn't end with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, it lives in the quiet moments of resilience. In the courage to choose oneself amidst the fractures of family. It is a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply reclaiming your life and refusing to be invisible any longer. Story 3. I had always believed family meant something unbreakable. A bond you never question, no matter the hardship. But that Thanksgiving, everything I thought I knew about my family came crashing down in a single sentence. I flew across the country to be there. Just like I did every year since college. Because deep down I still hoped we could be whole or, at least, civil. Yet when I arrived, my dad met me at the door with a look that said this moment was already decided. And then the words, "There's no seat for you this year. Just family tonight." It wasn't anger or cruelty. Just cold dismissal. No explanation. No apology. Just that hollow phrase like, I was a stranger who'd mistakenly shown up at the wrong house. The sound of silverware and laughter drifted from inside. A sharp contrast to the stillness settling over me. I recognized every familiar car on the street. Every face behind closed curtains, but not one of them was there for me. I nodded quietly, turned around, and walked back to the rental car I'd picked up earlier. Sitting behind the wheel. The phrase echoed in my mind. Just family tonight. The way he said it, it wasn't a boundary. It was a verdict. I wasn't family. I was something else. That night, in my hotel room, I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. Phone face down beside me. My thoughts raced over all the times I'd helped covering bills when money was tight. Sending grocery money during the lockdown. Quietly paying off the last mortgage payments months ago when my mom was overwhelmed by bank notices. I did it all silently. Expecting nothing but hoping it would build bridges, maybe earn me a place at their table. But instead, I was shut out. Then came the text from my sister. Just one line, "Don't take it personally. You always make things weird." The switch inside me flipped. For years I had bent over backward to be accepted. And this message was the final proof that none of it mattered. I wasn't family to them. I was an inconvenience. A mistake. I pulled out my laptop. Opened the documents. I'd kept meticulously, the mortgage statements. Payment confirmations. Signed agreements. This wasn't impulsive anger, this was cold clarity. I reversed the last payment. The final stitch holding their financial safety net together. By morning, the house was once again behind on its mortgage. The countdown to foreclosure, silently ticking away. As their group chat lit up with frantic messages. I watched from a distance. My mom's voicemail was tearful yet laced with blame. My sister accused me of ruining the holiday. My brother lashed out with anger and threats. But beneath it all, I saw something else, their true fear. The fear that the person they had always taken for granted was no longer willing to be the safety net. That the quiet helper had finally drawn a line. I didn't respond to the chaos. I stayed silent. Letting their desperate words expose their unraveling. This wasn't just about money, it was about finally being seen. Finally, standing up when I'd been pushed aside for too long. And, in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. No longer the invisible caretaker, but someone reclaiming her worth. The days after Thanksgiving were a silent storm. The family group chat, once a place for casual updates and holiday plans, turned into a battleground of accusations and desperate pleas. My phone buzzed relentlessly. But I refused to engage. It was their show now. And I was the silent force behind the scenes. My sister was the loudest voice, demanding explanations, framing me as the villain who had ambushed them. According to her, none of this was planned. It was all a misunderstanding. Yet, the flight confirmation I'd shared weeks earlier told a different story. My mom, too, tried to smooth things over with messages about forgiveness and family unity. But there was no acknowledgement of the hurt they caused me. No admission that they had deliberately shut me out. My brother's messages were the most venomous, accusing me of betrayal and sabotage. "You waited for the holidays to make a scene," he said, "just to tear this family apart." The irony was not lost on me. These people really believed I had the time and energy to orchestrate a financial trap just to spoil one night's dinner. They didn't see the years of quiet sacrifice beneath the surface. How I'd been the one holding everything together while they took and took without gratitude. I sat quietly, archiving message after message. No long rants. No dramatic confrontations. Just calm, collected silence that spoke louder than any argument. They needed a narrative, and I wasn't going to give them one they could spin. Then came my mom's voicemail, a soft, sobbing mix of hurt and confusion. She said she didn't understand what my dad meant by his words at the door. That it was all a big misunderstanding. But I knew better. I'd seen the pattern. The cold shoulders. The subtle digs. The way they ignored me when I needed them most. This wasn't confusion. It was cruelty masked as misunderstanding. By the middle of the week, a new narrative took hold. I was the outsider, the disruptor, the selfish sibling who threw money around to control them. My brother claimed I had no real interest in helping the family. I just wanted to pull the rug out from under everyone when it suited me. Their voices grew louder, their stories more dramatic. But the facts were unyielding. I had every receipt, every signed document, every email thread to prove my support. The family's denial didn't bother me anymore. In fact, it was almost liberating. I realized I didn't need their approval or acceptance. The years of trying to earn a place at their table had been wasted energy. They had already made their choice. And I was done trying to change their minds. In the quiet moments, when the notifications stopped and the noise faded, I felt something new, a strange calm. I was no longer carrying the weight of their expectations or their disdain. I had reclaimed my power. Not with anger or vengeance, but with clear boundaries and firm resolve. Yet, even as I moved forward, the family's struggle was far from over. The mortgage reversal sent shockwaves through their lives, and the consequences began to ripple beyond our strained relationships. The house I once helped keep afloat was slipping into foreclosure, a silent testament to the fractures that ran deeper than money. What surprised me most wasn't their anger or their attempts to manipulate the narrative. It was the way they tried to erase me, to pretend I never existed in their lives. Photos without me, stories that left me out, invitations never sent. They built a world where I was invisible, hoping that without me, everything would return to the way it was. But I knew better. This was a turning point. Their silence was not peace, it was a vacuum waiting to be filled. And I was no longer willing to be the one who filled it for them. As the days passed, the silence from my family was deafening. No calls, no messages, just the cold void of absence where connection once was. But beneath that stillness, I knew the storm was brewing. My sister's public posts, carefully curated with smiling faces and vague captions about family love and overcoming hardships, were thinly veiled attempts to rewrite history without me. Her words tried to paint me as the antagonist, the disruptive force that had shattered a perfect picture. Yet the truth was raw, messy, and far less flattering to them. I watched their world unravel quietly, like a house of cards caught in a slow wind. The mortgage payments stopped, and foreclosure notices quietly slipped through the cracks of their ignorance. I wasn't the villain for pulling back the financial support. I was the only one who ever kept the house from falling apart. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very family that dismissed me now faced the consequences of their neglect. Meanwhile, I built a fortress of calm around myself. The apartment I once viewed as a temporary refuge transformed into a sanctuary of control and clarity. No longer tied to the chaotic drama, I began channeling my energy into rebuilding myself. The quiet moments were filled with books, long walks, and the gentle hum of plans for a future that didn't include their approval. Yet the calls eventually came. Not from them, but from those watching from the sidelines, relatives, and distant friends who had seen the fractures and whispered their support in private messages. One cousin, who had always been the quiet observer, reached out with a simple text, "I see you. You deserve better." Those words, brief but powerful, echoed louder than any apology I'd never receive. But my peace was short-lived. A new twist emerged when I received a package at my door. No return address, just a plain brown box. Inside was a file of photographs, bank statements, and personal emails, all compiled meticulously. The message was clear: they were digging, searching for any flaw to discredit me, to weaponize against my silence. I realized then that this wasn't just about family or money anymore. It was a battle for control, for narrative, for power. They wanted to paint me as unstable, ungrateful, even dangerous. The twisted game of who holds the truth was underway, and I had to prepare for their next move. In the face of this new threat, I found unexpected strength. The years of being underestimated and overlooked had sharpened my resolve. I was no longer the girl who quietly paid bills or ignored slights. I was a woman ready to reclaim her story. Piece by piece, the deeper I dug into the documents they sent, the clearer it became that their desperation was unraveling old secrets, hidden debts, shady deals, and fractured loyalties beneath the polished facade. It was a glimpse into a family far more broken than anyone dared admit. And I held the pieces that could bring it all crashing down. But I didn't want to destroy. I wanted justice, clarity, and finally, freedom. I began to craft a plan, not one of spite, but of power balanced with principle. This wasn't about revenge for its own sake. It was about reclaiming dignity and setting boundaries no one could cross again. And just when I thought I was gaining control, the most shocking revelation arrived: a secret my family had buried deep. A truth that, if exposed, would not only shatter their image, but force them to confront the consequences of years of denial and neglect. As I sat in my quiet apartment, the weight of this secret pressing down, I knew that the next steps would change everything. The stakes were higher than ever, and the path forward was anything but certain. Would I finally break through the walls they built around me, or would the secrets they kept destroy what little trust remained? The answer lay just beyond the horizon, waiting to be revealed. The secret hit me like a thunderclap. Something so deeply buried, it explained years of cold shoulders and silent betrayals. It was an old legal dispute hidden in the family archives, something my parents had fought tooth and nail to keep from surfacing. The documents revealed a contested will, one that, if reopened, could rewrite the distribution of their assets entirely. Suddenly, the stakes were no longer just emotional. They were financial, legal, and deeply personal. This revelation gave me a new weapon, but also a heavy responsibility. I wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore, I was fighting for truth, for fairness, for a legacy that had been tainted by greed and secrecy. My mind raced, piecing together how I could use this information to finally tip the scales. But carefully, this was no place for reckless moves. I needed precision, patience, and above all, control. I reached out to an old family attorney, someone I'd met years ago through my grandfather, who was known for his discretion and sharp legal mind. Explaining the situation without revealing too much, I knew I had to tread carefully. The attorney's advice was clear: you have leverage, but wield it wisely. This is more than a family feud, it's a complex web of trust, law, and long-held grudges. As the days went by, I meticulously built my case. Every payment I'd made, every document I'd collected, every conversation I'd recorded, it all became part of an impenetrable shield. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore, I was rewriting the rules of engagement. Meanwhile, the family's attempts to control the narrative intensified. Social media posts, whispered rumors, even public confrontations, all aimed at painting me as the villain, the troublemaker. But the cracks were showing. Friends and acquaintances began to see the inconsistencies, the patterns of neglect and manipulation that had long been ignored. One afternoon, I received a call from a distant relative, someone who had always been neutral but deeply aware of the family's dynamics. "You're not alone," she said softly. "There are others who've suffered quietly, just like you. Maybe it's time to bring everything into the light." That call sparked something in me, a realization that this fight was bigger than just my story. It was about breaking cycles, exposing truths, and maybe even healing old wounds. But healing would have to wait. The next challenge was to confront my family directly, to force a reckoning that could no longer be avoided. I drafted a carefully worded letter, firm, respectful, and impossible to ignore, outlining my discoveries and the steps I intended to take. I sent it to my parents, my sister, and key family members, making sure it was delivered with proof of receipt. The response was predictably defensive. Messages poured in: denials, threats, accusations of betrayal. But beneath the bluster, I sensed fear. For the first time, they realized that the game had changed and that I was no longer the one who would silently bear the brunt of their indifference. As the tension escalated, old allies emerged in unexpected places. Friends who had witnessed the family's fractures reached out with support and validation. Even some family members who had stayed quiet found the courage to speak up, sharing their own stories of being sidelined and silenced. I wasn't just fighting anymore. I was leading a movement within the family, one that demanded accountability and transparency. The conversations shifted from blame to acknowledgement, from silence to dialogue. But the road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. And just when I thought I was gaining ground, the family made their most desperate move, yet an attempt to legally block my actions, filing injunctions and calling in favors from old connections. The battle wasn't just emotional, it was becoming a full-blown legal war. Sitting in my apartment late at night, surrounded by files and phone calls, I felt the weight of it all: the exhaustion, the pain, but also an unyielding resolve. This wasn't just about winning, it was about finally being seen and respected for who I was, not what I could provide. With the court dates looming and the family's narrative crumbling, I knew the next few weeks would be critical. The final showdown was near a moment that would decide not just my fate, but the future of the family legacy itself. Would justice prevail, or would years of secrets and manipulation drown out the truth once again? The answer was just beyond reach, waiting for the next move. The courtroom was cold and impersonal. But inside, every word echoed with years of betrayal and silent suffering. The family that once dismissed me now sat across from me, their faces etched with disbelief and anger. But I felt calm, ready. This was my moment to reclaim everything that had been stolen: respect, dignity, and the truth. As the hearing unfolded, I presented the evidence: painstakingly gathered documents, financial records, emails, and testimonies from relatives who had dared to speak out. The judge listened intently, the weight of decades-old grudges and secrets laid bare on the table. For the first time, the veneer of perfection was stripped away, revealing the cracks beneath. My family tried to counter with denials and distractions, but their arguments felt hollow against the unassailable facts. The tension was palpable. Every accusation thrown back and forth was like a flare in the darkness, illuminating long-buried wounds. Outside the courtroom, the community watched closely. Rumors spread, sympathies shifted, and the story that once was whispered in private was now headline news: a tale of resilience, betrayal, and the quest for justice. I realized then that my fight had transcended family drama. It had become a beacon for anyone who had ever felt invisible or undervalued. Days turned into weeks as the legal battle dragged on, each hearing peeling back another layer of the family's hidden dynamics. Yet, amidst the conflict, something unexpected happened: moments of vulnerability. During a particularly charged session, my mother broke down, confessing her guilt and regrets. It was not a clean reconciliation, but it was real: a crack in the wall of years of silence. I didn't expect forgiveness, nor did I seek it. What I wanted was acknowledgement, an end to the charade where my worth was measured only by what I gave. As the judge finally delivered the verdict, declaring the trust restructured and my rights restored, a wave of relief washed over me. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter, free from the chains of obligation and betrayal. My family's doors were not fully open. Some would never welcome me back, but I had carved out a space where I could stand tall, no longer shadowed by their doubts. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life on my own terms. I poured my energy into my career, nurtured genuine friendships, and embraced the quiet joy of independence. The scars remained, but they were now badges of strength, reminders of battles fought and won. Reflecting on the journey, I understood that the deepest wounds are not those inflicted by others, but those we carry silently inside. Breaking free required courage, yes, but also the willingness to see ourselves as worthy beyond anyone's approval. If there's one lesson in my story, it's this: sometimes walking away isn't defeat, it's victory. Choosing to protect yourself, to demand respect, and to rewrite your narrative is the bravest act of all. The family I lost was never truly mine to keep, but the woman I found through the struggle is someone I finally honor. So if you've ever felt invisible or underestimated, remember, your value isn't defined by others. Your story is yours to tell, and your power lies in how you rise. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated, please like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of truth, resilience, and family drama that hits hard. Until next time, stay strong And never forget your worth.